This screencast is intended to give viewers an overview of the Interoperability Toolkit, explain a little bit about the specifications, where you can find them, where you can find useful information, and basically give you the details that you need to know to be able to understand the specifications, to understand what parts are applicable to you as a system developer or maybe as an NHS organisation, and then also understand what the steps are in terms of implementing and then, if desired, moving towards accreditation. So the starting page for most people looking into the ITK would be the HSCIC website. The website contains various information about ITK. ITK has existed for a number of years. Its sole focus is around interoperability, and it's basically a set of specifications and supporting functions, including the support required for development and also the support required for accreditation, and also advice in terms of deployment. And it's a function that's offered by the HSCIC Health and Social Care Information Centre. So the main landing point, as I said, is the Interoperability Toolkit web page. This contains various pieces of information. Explains a little bit about ITK, what its focus is. Certainly at the moment, 2015, a lot of the focus is around transfer of care and the changes to the NHS contract. So the clear desire to see systems move towards interoperable solutions for the passing of discharges, particularly between acute trusts and GP systems. The website also covers some details in terms of accreditation, which I'll go into later on. So, as I said, it's a set of specifications that you can download from the TRUD website. The specifications are detailed here. It's effectively broken up into two key parts. There's a set of documents which basically cover the architecture, i.e. the pipework that connects systems together, and then there are numerous what we term domain message specifications, DMSs, published, which basically cover the payload, the content, actually the message itself that passes over this common infrastructure between systems. So if we take a look at TRUD, so as users of TRUD, you'll have to register for an account, but that's a relatively quick process just to set up an account. You see on the left hand side that we've got a set of collections. Under the interoperability framework, there are 33 specifications or packs published. The Interoperability Toolkit contains the core specifications, the ones that are, I guess, are reused again and again, regardless of the payload that's being used. So predominantly this is where those specifications are stored. So we've got the ITK architecture and the core. Once you've downloaded those specifications, they basically self-extract into folders. So if we go and take a look at the architecture pack, it comes down as a zip file, and you extract it out and you get a single folder. Open this folder and it's got an index file here. We open that file up. This basically is a self-contained web pack, so it'll render itself on a browser, and this gives you the overview of the architecture documentation set, separated into two areas. So we've got a couple of overview documents. The architecture overview document's actually a really good starting point. This hopefully puts ITK into more context and explains a little bit more around the different system types. and then we've got a set of more specific documents which are very much focused on what role you're playing as a provider. So for example, are you generating payload or are you purely consuming payload? So I guess an example would be, are you generating an e-discharge CDA or are you purely consuming an e-discharge CDA, and so on. So dependent on your role, if you're sending a document, you'd be a client. If you're receiving a document, you'd be a host. Certainly today, ITK has predominantly been focused around documents, and that's the reason for me making that reference. All payloads are wrapped up within a distribution envelope, so there's a specific specification for that. And these layers, I guess, are effectively decoupled. So the distribution envelope, which wraps around, for example, a CDA document, is used for all transport types. And typically, an implementer would select the one that's most appropriate, particularly if you're sending a document. If you're receiving a document, then you may want to open up multiple channels. But I guess to date, predominantly the focus has been on web services, but there's now a clear move to implement and to use the national infrastructure, the infrastructure that's used by the spine services, so to use the transactional messaging service, TMS. And there's also a routing and addressing specification, which is predominantly for the use of middleware and intermediary type systems. I think the reality is that to date there aren't really that many implementations that are using ITK routing. Predominantly, most implementations are point to point. So that's the architecture specification. As I said, I think a good starting point is the architecture overview document. This is a PDF document, and it covers a lot of the base knowledge that you need to understand ITK. It describes the system types and so on, so I would definitely advise reading that document first. We've also got in here accreditation configurations. I'll come on to that later when I cover the accreditation pack. So that's the architecture documentations. On TRUD we've also got the ITK core pack. So the ITK core pack, which I've got here, also contains information that's replayed any number of times dependent on the payload that you implement. So this pack covers the distribution envelope, which wraps around the ITK payload, explains the construction of it. You've got the schema in here, you've got an overview, so basically it tells you what the various headers are and attributes that exist within the distribution envelope. We've also got the schema and so on within there. The acknowledgement framework is something that's used predominantly for clinical documentation, and it's basically a mechanism for sending an acknowledgement that a document has been received by the intended recipient. Also gives the ability to send back a negative acknowledgement as well, so should there be an issue around the payload, then this framework also allows you to send back what we would term a NAC. And it also has a business acknowledgement as well. So this is actually an embedded DMS, so it's another DMS. Unfortunately I haven't got the link to it, but basically that's embedded within it as well. So the business acknowledgement is predominantly, as the name would suggest, around giving you a mechanism to send back an acknowledgement that, for example, a patient may have been matched, or a document may have been read by a clinician or suitably qualified individual, and that the recipient was happy with the content and was happy, I guess, in effect, to take ownership of it. and the acknowledgement framework just gives you a mechanism to send that acknowledgement back to the sending system, who are maintaining some form of state around the interaction at that business level, so they then know that effectively that process is complete. So that's really what it's for. Again, we're not prescriptive in terms of the logic behind the business acknowledgement. It's very much about providing a capability and a common way of acknowledging when sending clinical documents. So that's the core pack. There are some additional information here around the use of metadata. Again, to date, it hasn't really been implemented in any great numbers, but it does cover the information around building metadata related to payloads. So that's the core documents. If we go back, we've also got within here the trust operating model, which is effectively a set of guidance documents that are intended for implementers. So from a central perspective, there are certain aspects that aren't accredited. So the trust operating model covers the areas where potentially additional guidance may be required. So the trust operating model is basically a set of guidance documentations around architecture, IG, clinical safety, with checklists that exist, and it's very much focused around local interoperability and locally assured solutions. So it's really trying to give the implementers some resources to use should they not have them. Another resource that exists is the developer.nhs.uk website, and this is a site that came into being a number of years ago, but was recently started to gain more traction purely and simply because of the amount of information that's going on there. Under the test centre, the ITK accreditation team has placed various pieces of information. So under the Interoperability Toolkit option, you'll find down here that there are various guidance documents, including a number of PowerPoint presentations that have been embedded within here, which basically give you an overview of ITK. So these are quite useful. I think they certainly help explain and position ITK. They reference the what was once termed the connect all strategy. I think is very much something that is trying to be achieved, and that's detailed here, showing you where ITK fits, the fact that it's very much focused around technical interfaces. It also explains the different system types, as I mentioned previously. So ITK clients responsible for creating messages, ITK hosts responsible for consuming messages, and then the middleware option. Certainly in terms of middleware, I think it's worthwhile mentioning the fact that a number of the middleware vendors that have adopted ITK and become compliant as middleware vendors also often take the role of partnering with client applications and providing them really with a shim, an ITK adapter, maybe we could call it, that basically translates their native output to make it ITK compliant, and certainly that's been something that's been implemented on quite a number of occasions. So various different things in here, also some references around ITK and TRUD, similar sort of things to what I mentioned previously, slides which basically show you the various different components and how things fit together. Again, similar to what I've mentioned already around the core pack, trust operating model, and then jumping into ITK accreditation. The second PowerPoint deck that's on there, again, it's very similar to the first one. Positions where ITK is coming from in terms of trying to tick the interoperability areas. So as I mentioned, it's very much focused around the technical interface. It's not trying to solve the complete puzzle, but it's certainly it's a good step in the right direction in terms of covering the interface, the technical description, and certainly in terms of defining the payloads and the structures, and where applicable, sets of values which may exist and so on. So it certainly gives you a very good reference point from that perspective. Again, I mentioned it already, very much focused around local interoperability, although with the push around e-discharge and the move towards TMS as a transport mechanism, really now what we're looking at is providing national reach through ITK. Accreditation's always formed part of ITK. It's always been something that we're conscious can support the adoption of ITK. I think it's important to point out that it's not purely just a box ticking exercise. It's very much a support function around implementation, helping vendors to understand the specifications, providing them with help and assistance around implementation, and ultimately guiding them so that they can almost effectively self-accredit and then submit to the ITK accreditation team a set of evidence that proves their adherence to the standards. Obviously the aim really is to get that evidence when submitted as close as possible to what's required, so that we minimise any form of rework. So there's a lot of dialogue encouraged, and certainly we encourage the system suppliers to engage with the ITK accreditation team and to use the expertise and knowledge that they've got to their benefit. Also worth mentioning that it's a relatively lightweight process. Typically implementation, although very dependent on the capabilities of the implementer, of course, it can be a relatively short time frame. So we can get accreditations through typically in a number of weeks. We've had some instances where we've had them implemented in 5 days. We've had some instances where it's taken a number of months. It's very much dependent on the capabilities of the developer, and if they understand things like web services or have familiarity, then generally it speeds up the process. What we have recognised though is that there are other things that we can do to help you and to help implementation. So things like screencasts. The accreditation service provides all the test tooling that's required, so effectively from an implementer's perspective you can use the tooling, there's no need to develop anything yourself. We provide you with the test basis so you can understand what you need to test your interface. We've also got code that's been written in both Java and C#. It's open source code, it's code that you can use either to do your own implementation or purely use it as a crib sheet, as reference, and that code is available on the developer network. So from the download and data option, you'll see here that we've got various different code libraries that exist, reference implementations. There's also an ITK payloads library for constructing CDAs that's published on here, so that there are various resources available. If we go back to the slide, so basically the flow of accreditation is all focused around supporting the implementation, providing developers with resources that they may need, like code and effectively almost a telephone service if you want to phone up and ask us around any issues. So we tried to build it as much as possible so that it's very much focused on self-sufficiency. and effectively when you come to being evaluated and certified, that effectively you should basically minimise that rework process as much as possible. Already mentioned the trust operating model. In terms of accreditation scope, as I mentioned at the beginning, effectively ITK can be thought of as being broken up into two distinct areas. There are a set of infrastructure specifications which effectively is the pipework that connects systems together, web services for local integration, DTS, which is a legacy transport system predominantly used for pathology messaging, and I think probably our more strategic option, which provides national reach, allows you to send from any system to any system over that national spine infrastructure, TMS, the transactional messaging system. So you've got your infrastructure as one part, then you've got your message domains, and in here we've got things like the clinical documentation, all focused around CDA, HSCI, section 2, section 5 definitions. Although not shown on here, we've also now got the e-discharge, so the transfer of care pack, which links into the NIB strategy, the NIB framework for action. So that's becoming a very much a key focus of what we're doing now. And there's also what we term a set of self-certified requirements. So ITK has this broad set of requirements which are very much focused around making sure that when we accredit a system, that it's something that's suitable for use within a healthcare setting. Typically, for most vendors that are implementing a system or already selling a system into the healthcare market, those types of requirements really don't pose any sort of issues, because they're things that are focused around access controls and auditing and so on. So the types of things that really most commercial systems or open source systems that are being used within a healthcare setting would typically need. We've also got an accreditation option which is purely based around content, and that's for HL7V2. ADT messages, admission, discharge and transfer. So this is the I guess the messages which were typically known as the pipe and hat delineated messages, and we do have that very much for sending systems, so systems that are sending messages that want to use our specifications, which are very good in terms of nailing down the use of segments and fields, and offer basically a reference point for implementations. And this is really just an acknowledgement that a lot of ADT messages that are passed around, particularly around an acute trust, for example, would be sat within that very minimal wrapper using MLLP protocol, and that something like web services, DTS, TMS, really they're probably a little bit too heavyweight for what's required, but there's certainly great benefit in having a single reference point and having a single definition for HL7V2 messages. So we do offer a content only accreditation for HL7V2 messages. As I mentioned previously, we've got different roles, so we've got the applications and the content only. We've also got spine mini services, which are a set of specifications which basically define how almost like a proxy system into spine could be constructed and act almost as that security layer, and it's been linked in with a number of specific use cases. So one of them is PDS for a single patient match, a read-only service that doesn't need smart card. Also for the child protection information system, and recently for SCR. And typically you've got two roles there. You've got provider systems which go through a central assurance process, which has been tailored specifically for the role that they're doing and the risk associated with it, i.e. they're acting really as that protection layer into spine. And then you've got clients which connect direct to it. From a PDS perspective, the clients don't need to be accredited, although we certainly encourage it. The same for CPIS, clients don't have to be accredited, again we would encourage it. And then SCR clients, which do have to have a essential accreditation, purely and simply because of the clinical safety risk that's associated with the displaying of that data. A fairly lightweight process, something that's just done once with the mini service providers, with the mini service clients for SCR. So that's the accreditation types. When we accredit a system, effectively we accredit it against a specific version, against a specific product, and we detail what we term the bundles that have been accredited against it. So whilst I've highlighted the word bundles, it's worthwhile just digging into that slightly further. The accreditation pack that's downloaded, let's open this up. So the accreditation pack contains some related documents, and it contains something called the service listing spreadsheet. And the Toolkit service listing spreadsheet effectively contains all the different message definitions, or the domain message specifications that are published. So we talk about HL7v2 ADT messages. We've got clinical correspondence, HSCI, and so on. And basically the messages, the message bundles are these lines that are in green. So if we look at non-coded CDA, for example, non-coded CDA contains three message types, or rather I should say interaction types. So we've got a primary recipient interaction, we've got a copy recipient, and then we've got a nullify CDA. And over here we state whether they're mandatory for host and clients, and in this instance the primary recipient and copy recipient are both mandatory for both clients and hosts, and the nullify is something that's optional. So for example, as a sending system, you would have to be able to send both a primary recipient and copy recipient message, which effectively are exactly the same. However, the distribution envelope, which is an XML wrapper, has a single attribute within there that would change from primary recipient to copy recipient, and then optionally you may decide to also send a nullify non-coded CDA. So that specific interaction is optional. Okay, so we go back to the overview. So that's the bundles, and then once the system's been accredited, effectively they go on to the ITK catalogue, and they're detailed there against the specific version. It's down to the implementers, it's down to the supplier themselves to decide as and when they want to update the catalogue. Typically we're seeing trusts now asking, as part of their tender process, for suppliers to state if they're accredited or not, and certainly what we would encourage the trust to do is to make sure that the version that they're procuring is accredited. So it's something that really, in terms of the strategy, we leave it down to the suppliers as and when they want to reaccredit. We produce all the test tooling, so it's relatively easy through the use of an automated suite to run a regression pack. It literally takes a number of minutes to execute, and then the tooling automatically zips up, or rather keeps all the tests all self-contained within a single folder, which can be zipped up and submitted to the accreditation team through a SharePoint site, which we basically create for each supplier once we're informed that they wish to go through accreditation. The SharePoint site also contains information that can help implementers. So other guidance materials available on there. This slide is slightly out of date now. The number of accredited systems has gone up, but I think it shows the key divisions in terms of implementations, and the fact that predominantly to date CDA has been the key set of specifications that have been implemented. Certainly from a HSCIC perspective, CDA remains something that we're heavily focused on. The e-discharge and the new DMSs that have been published on TRUD, which I can show you. If I just go back here, let's open up the e-discharge. I think it's under, sorry, it's under message specifications, transfer of care. So certainly this is one of the latest specifications that has been published. As I mentioned previously, there's a clear push towards the adoption of e-discharge between acutes and GP systems, and certainly with the GP SOC contract looking to open up those channels, it's going to be something that becomes more prevalent in the near future. And basically the specification still focused around CDA. This specific version that we're looking at, draft A, is predominantly focused around the inclusion of just text sections as opposed to coded sections, although the next version, which is due to be published in July, will contain coded entries. It's still CDA. I guess the key thing from a HSCIC perspective is that the clinical headings that are included within this specification are those which have been recognised and detailed by the Professional Record Standards body. So it's not HSCIC that have been developing them, it's actually come from the PRSB, obviously through the endorsement of the National Information Board. So this is really just to reiterate the fact that there is a clear commitment within HSCIC towards continuing with the use of HL7 CDA. I know a lot of people that listen to this screencast will be aware that HL7 fire is something that's certainly gaining momentum, and it's something that I'm sure will become more prominent in terms of future specifications that are published by HSCIC, but certainly the transfer of care messages are very much focused on HL7 CDA. So some metrics here around the duration for implementation. As I mentioned previously, we have had some implementations which have been very short, some which have been quite long. It's very much dependent on the capabilities that exist within an organisation. I think if you're familiar with, for example, spine integration, if you're implementing TMS, or if you're familiar with web services, then it certainly makes the transport implementation far easier. The adoption of some of our code, or at least looking through that code, will help you to understand how to do the implementation. Also, HL7 CDA, I think it's not necessary from an implementation perspective, from a developer's perspective, to understand all the nuances of CDA. There's a lot of content within CDA which is static, and certainly there are ways to build CDA through the use of templates, through the use of the CDA payloads libraries that HSCIC have produced, which can help and really ease that burden in terms of the construction of a CDA document. So there are a lot of resources available. This screencast really is intended to give you a starter for 10 to understand what resources are available, and hopefully help you to understand where you ought to go in terms of further reading and trying to sort of understand more around what information you need from an implementation perspective, or indeed from a procurement perspective, if you're looking to purchase a system which has ITK capabilities. If there is any further information you'd like, or if you'd like to delve into any specific areas in further detail, the ITK accreditation team, which is detailed here, the contact email address, will be more than willing to help, more than willing to set up a WebEx session or a telephone call to talk through in further detail. So hopefully this screencast has been of use and has informed you. As I said, if you have any further questions or you would like any further information, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.